On the 8th of August 2020 at 12:15 in the afternoon, I gave birth to our firstborn son, Judah Saint Mudrovcic, and this is my birth story. So we are now 7 weeks postpartum, and I'm finally ready to sit down and share my birth story on a public platform. It's been really difficult for me to have to do this, and it's taken a lot of preparation and courage, and a lot of people might ask why. And I think the best way to start that and to explain that is because I really believe that, birth means the world to every woman. It is the highlight of their life, it's the most important day of their life, and it's the most life-changing day of any woman's life and any father's life. But how you give birth means different things to different women, and certain options mean more to others and vice versa. And so this video, I'm not going to be touching on the different options, C-section, natural, home birth, hospital birth, whatever. I'm just going to be talking about what it meant to me, what I wanted, and why I wanted it. So natural birth is something that meant the absolute world to me. I was fascinated with it from before I was even pregnant. I thought it was just, it's such an amazing gift of life, and such an amazing thing that our bodies were literally designed to give birth to our children. And it's something that blew my mind. I loved researching it, I loved learning about it, and I was just so engulfed with the beauty of it. And I was just so ridiculously excited to be able to experience that myself with the birth of our son. I wanted it all. I was so excited. I was not scared of the pain. I was never scared of labor and never scared of birth. There was nothing about it that for me personally scared me. I was literally just so excited for it. I was so ready to embrace the pain, to embrace the contractions, to embrace it all, and to just feel that unbelievably empowering feeling of being able to step into what my body was designed to do, and give birth to my baby naturally. I'll start with what we planned and then tell you what actually happened, and then at the end of this video, which I think is the most important reason why I've decided to share my story, is because I want to share what I learned from what I went through, because I think it's not only relevant for me, but thousands of women in the world. And although this video is not necessarily going to reach thousands of women, if it even just reaches one and helps them in their journey, then that's all that matters for me. We started with our birth plan before we were even pregnant. Like I said, I was so fascinated with natural birth before we fell pregnant, and something else that I was so fascinated with was home birth. I met my midwife, Junita, who is an angel of a woman, and I met her before I fell pregnant, and she introduced me and let me know about home births, and I was so surprised. I didn't even know it was a thing. And I'm going to do a separate video completely on more in detail of why we chose to go with home birth, why I think home births are incredible for low risk women, and not only because I want to share what fascinated me about home birth, but because I think there's so many women out there who don't even know that it's a thing, don't even know that it's safe, and for them it would actually be the best and most amazing option. So that's going to be a separate video. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that now, but Josh and I were so set on a home birth. Like I said, there was nothing about birth that scared me. I had no fear in my heart that something was going to go terribly wrong, and I knew that there would be the correct medical backup if something did go wrong, and I was just so ready for it. Our friends and family were all a part of it, all part of the planning. I would chat about it with my dad, who is actually a previous obstetrician. He's delivered babies for over 20 years. He's a medical doctor. Chat about it with my best friend and go into so much detail, and was just so ready for it. We were all just so excited for the experience. So that was the plan, and that was what we wanted. We had no specific plan on necessarily how we wanted to give birth. I didn't say like, I want to be in the water, I want to be in this place at the house, I want to do this, that, and the next thing. All I wanted was I just wanted it to be at home. I just wanted it to be peaceful, for the environment to feel safe. I have a very, very strong fear of hospitals. I grew up with a sister who had congenital heart defect, and she grew up basically in the hospital, so hospitals have a very negative connotation for me. And also, once I did some research, you learn and you figure out that for natural birth, your environment is very, very important as to how your birth is going to end up. And being in home when you're somebody who feels safe at home and doesn't necessarily feel like they would only be safe in the hospital, which is somebody like me, home birth is the best option. I had such a healthy pregnancy, no red flags at all, ever. He was head down from like, I think 28 weeks. He was dropping really low. By the time I got to 37 weeks, my gynae actually said to me, she doesn't even think this baby's going to last till 40 weeks. He's probably going to come sooner because he's so low. And yeah, everything was just great. And we got to 37 weeks. We got the go-ahead that we cleared for home birth. Everything's safe, everything's good. And we just basically sat and waited for Judah to come. We did things like we went on a walk to Sacramento on the Sacramento Trail every single day. I did the date smoothies, I did the essential oils, the ball exercises to maintain that optimal positioning that Judah was in. And then my midwife was going to come to me every week from then. She came to me at 38 weeks, did a check, everything was great. Blood pressure fine, urine fine, baby fine, heart rate, everything perfect, optimal position. It was like good to go. I started to get like slight Braxton Hicks, a lot of pelvic pressure because he was lying so low. And I started to get like really excited. I was like, oh, you know, maybe this means he's going to come soon. So backtrack a little bit, from my 35-week scan that I had with my dad, he said that he started to notice that my placenta had started to calcify, which is a word for basically it started to age, which is not a red flag if it happens at 35 weeks. It's a red flag if it starts to happen at like 30 weeks. But 35 weeks is pretty okay. It's pretty normal. It was something that like not worried me, but I was like a little bit like, okay, I really hope he does come early then, because obviously I don't want this to be like a contraindication to his health or anything. And so on the Monday, just before I was 39 weeks, I had this anxious feeling, and I all of a sudden just felt like this baby needs to come now. My placenta is not, something just told me that something's going wrong with my placenta, and he needs to come now. And then that Wednesday, my midwife came for my 39-week checkup, and she checked my blood pressure, and she checked my urine, and she checked the baby's position. Baby's position was great. My blood pressure was a little bit high. It was 130/74 or something like that. So it was like a little bit high, but not too much of a concern. And then what came the concern is that my urine test, my protein levels were at the highest possible level that they could be, which was like quite a big red flag. So above and beyond that, I had started to get some headaches, and I had also really started to swell a lot in the last 2 days. My knees were swollen. It was difficult for me to bend my knees. My hands were swollen. My face was swollen. I almost like blew up like a blowfish. And I kind of just thought maybe it's just pregnancy symptoms. And I knew that I was going to get checked up on Wednesday, so I wasn't too worried about it when it started over the weekend. And so when we saw my protein levels in my urine, my midwife said, let me come back tomorrow morning and do another check. It could just be fluke. She came back on the Thursday morning, and for some reason on the Wednesday night, I just knew what happened. I knew in my heart that the home birth wasn't going to happen anymore. I knew in my heart that the home birth wasn't going to happen anymore, and I already started to kind of accept it and prepare for it. And even though Josh kept saying to me, everything's going to be fine, and you're going to have your home birth, and it's going to work out, and we've prayed for this, and we've believed for this, and everything's going to be okay. I knew that everything was going to be okay, but I somehow just knew I wasn't going to be able to give birth at home anymore. And so the next morning my midwife came, and she did my urine, and my urine the protein wasn't as high as the night before, but there was still protein in my urine. And then she checked my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was 145/110, which was a red flag. And so at that point, she sat me down and said that unfortunately I have to be handed over to my gynae. This doesn't mean that it's preeclampsia, but it's no longer okay for me to not be handed over to my gynae, which of course is totally correct, and I was very grateful that she did that. And so I made an emergency appointment with Dr. Musa that afternoon, and I went in at 12 o'clock. And she checked me again. She checked baby. Baby was doing 100% fine. My placenta had calcified even more than my previous 37-week scan. and she checked my urine, and again it was at its highest level, and then she checked my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was 165 over 115, which is really high. And then and there she said to me, home birth is out, I'm really so sorry, but baby's gotta come. This is definitely preeclampsia. And so that's when it hit me, and I was in the appointment alone without Josh because of COVID, and I messaged him and I said, home birth is out, I have to be admitted into the hospital because they have to monitor my blood pressure and get me on medication to bring it down, and I'm going to be induced tomorrow for natural birth. So at least I got to go home first, get my stuff, pack my bags and everything, and see Josh again, and then came back. So we went home and I cried so much. I ugly cried, I bawled, I wept, I don't even know what it is, but I just couldn't stop crying. And coming home and looking at everything, and it sounds so stupid, looking at my dogs, I was like, I don't want to go to the hospital, I just want to stay at home with my dogs and my husband and have my friends. And anyway, I couldn't, and I had to accept it. So, you know, even though when we planned for home birth, I always had said, and I knew in my heart that if it didn't happen, it was for a reason, and God was going to give me the strength and the peace to get through whatever we needed to get through. And so I had peace, and I knew that everything was going to be okay, and I knew that Judah was going to be safe, and I was going to be safe. That was never a worry for me. It was just that it was a shock. Even though I, in my heart, prepared that birth doesn't always go the way you want it to go, and you have to keep an open mind, which I definitely did keep, it was still really hard. And I think what made it so much harder is that I had to go into the hospital alone. And I'm terrified of hospitals, and everybody in my family knows that it is literally probably one of my biggest fears, if not the biggest fear that I have. And I walked into the hospital alone, and I had to process everything alone. And I didn't even have anyone in my ward. I didn't have moms to speak to. I was put in an isolation ward because they were waiting for my COVID tests to come back. And it was really hard, and I cried non-stop. And anyway, I was put on medication to monitor my blood pressure. My blood pressure came down, and thankfully at that stage I had been taken, blood tests had been taken to determine if the preeclampsia was at like an extremely dangerous level, or if it was still okay for me to be induced to try for natural. And it was thankfully still okay for me to try for natural. So my doctor came to me that evening and said, okay, your bloods have come back, it's definitely preeclampsia. She's pretty certain that it's connected to my placenta, and that my placenta is just aging, and it's just not being able to provide what it needs to for the baby anymore. But she's happy to go ahead with the induction the next day. The Friday came, and that night and Thursday I had a shower. I got myself mentally prepared. I slept 2 hours on the Thursday night because I just couldn't stop thinking about everything. And then the Friday came, and I woke up and I thought, okay, I'm not gonna fail at this, I'm gonna do this. And I had to gain all that courage on my own. I couldn't cry in Josh's arms or my mum's arms or my friend's arms. I just had to do it on my own, which was, like I've said 100 times, was really hard. But I thought to myself, I'm gonna put the emotions that I'm feeling right now in a box, and I'm not gonna leave that box untouched, but I'm just gonna put it away for now. I'm gonna smash this birth, and I'm gonna bring this baby into the world, and I will deal with these emotions and this grief that I'm feeling for the loss of my home birth afterwards. And I said that to my midwife, and I said that to Josh, and they said 100%, you have to grieve this. This is something that you've lost out on. You wanted it, you prayed for it, and you didn't get it, and it's so totally okay for you to be heartbroken. But let's push into now what the cards we've been dealt with. Bring the faith up to a whole nother level that everything's going to be okay, and that you're going to still have a beautiful experience. And so that's what I did. And I woke up and I curled my hair and I put my makeup on and I got ready and I made myself feel really good. And the main midwife came in and she told me that she knows that I was meant to have a home birth, and she's going to do everything in her power to make sure that my labor and my birth experience is as natural and as beautiful and as holistic as possible, which meant the world to me. She told me that I can labor in whatever clothes I want, I can eat through labor, I can switch the lights off, play my music, light the candles, do whatever I need. I started to get excited for what was now to come. They started the induction at 12 o'clock that afternoon, and it was just swallowing a dose of misoprostol every 2 hours. And Josh got to come and meet me at 4 o'clock that afternoon once I moved into the labor ward. I didn't experience contractions immediately after the doses, which is very normal. And so when Josh got to me, I was still pretty much not in labor. I wasn't feeling any pain at all. I had my last dose at 6 p.m. The doctor came and did a cervical exam on me at about 9 p.m. that evening. And although I wasn't dilated at all, my cervix was very soft and low. So she said, things could happen tonight. I need you to get off the bed, walk around, be on the ball, lunges, squats, do what you need to do. And so we had my midwife on standby on WhatsApp, which was a lifesaver. And so we messaged her and said, cool, this is what's happening, what do we do? And she sent a whole bunch of exercises, and we did that, and we went and walked through the hospital ward and did the squats and the lunges down the halls. Came back, both circles on the ball, and then I said to Josh, you know what, I really need to rest. I slept 2 hours last night. I'm feeling absolutely exhausted. I know I should be walking around and doing all these exercises, but if labor is a marathon and you need to have energy to get through it. So we went to bed at about 11:30, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was kind of in and out of my sleep, just the noises from the hospital and whatever, and I was getting like slight contractions, but it really was nothing. It was like I could sleep through it. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had to dream that someone punched me in the stomach and there was a pop, and all of a sudden I woke up and I was like, babe, I think my water just broke. And as I sat up, this gush of water just came out in the whole bed. And so I got up and I was like, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is so cool. Like my water's just broken, like this is insane. And I actually had a little bit of meconium in my water, which is a sign of fetal distress. But luckily baby was still doing fine. We monitored the baby and he was all good, his heart rate was fine. And so we went and carried on for labor, and immediately as my water broke, my contractions started, and my contractions were more of a pelvic pressure than they were an actual like contraction like up at the top of my tummy pulling down. Even though the monitor was telling me I was having those kinds of contractions, I wasn't really feeling them. What was really intense for me was the pelvic pressure, because Judah was lying so low, and obviously once your water breaks, it is even more pressure. We labored, and my contractions were about 6 minutes apart at that stage, and I was coping fine, and I was breathing through, and I had done hypnobirthing before, and I was so excited for labor anyway that I was like super excited to finally be in labor. Labor was just the most beautiful experience. It was intense, and it took a lot of mind games and breathing and support from Josh, but it was so beautiful, and I would go back and do it again and again and again, and I'm so excited to do it again for the next baby. 2 or 3. So yeah, it was so amazing. It ignited myself and Josh in a way that I obviously never even could have imagined. We had worship music playing and candles going, and there were times where I was holding on to Josh and trying to sing but not singing the lyrics of the song, and all these songs were the songs that I was listening to throughout my pregnancy and imagining myself being in labor. And I just remember standing there the one day at a time singing the song Champion by Bethel, and it says you are my champion, and I just kept singing those lyrics, and I thought, I can't believe I used to listen to this sitting on my ball in our lounge, and now I'm here, I'm in labor, our baby's coming, like this is insane. So it was really, really cool and beautiful, and I was super grateful for the nurses and my gynae. They never switched the lights on once. They came on and did the cervical exams with the lights off and the music playing and the candles going, and it was so respected. It was just amazing. And so anyway, they came in at 9 o'clock and I was 5 centimeters dilated, which was great. Great progress. Whoop, we're going, like this is amazing, baby's still doing well. It was intense, but Josh kept me going and kept saying to me, you've got this, like you are so prepared for this, you're the strongest person that I know, like you can get through this. And now at this point my contractions were about 3 minutes apart, and they were lasting about a minute to a minute and a half. So things really felt like they were progressing quite a bit, and I could feel that this little guy was really, like, he was low down there. And so they came in again and checked me at 11 o'clock, and unfortunately I was still 5 centimeters dilated, which is not a problem because it's very normal to have slow progress in labor. And also Judah had moved and he was lying posterior and he wasn't anterior, so that often means for a little bit of a longer labor. So my gynae it wasn't like an immediate red flag. It was like, okay, you haven't progressed in the last 2 hours. I think it's probably because he's lying posterior, which is not a problem, but let's just check how he's doing. If he's doing fine, 100%, let's keep going. If he's not, then we might have to look at some other options. So we monitored for him for 20 minutes. And unfortunately at this stage Judah was no longer coping with the contractions, which is often common with induction births, especially with the medication that I was given. It can often cause fetal distress, and so his heart rate was dropping after contractions and not recovering. It's very normal for a baby's heart rate to drop during a contraction and then recover, but unfortunately his was dropping afterwards and just not going back up, or taking way too long to go back up. It was then and there that I was lying in the bed and I knew in my heart, this is going to end in a C-section. I remember lying in the bed and going through the contractions, and she said to the nurse, she's doing really well and she's breathing really well, so I'm not worried about that, but baby just doesn't seem to be coping with these contractions. And from listening and reading to so many birth stories before, while I was pregnant, I knew what that meant. And so when they left the room, I looked at Josh and I said, if I need to have a C-section, it's okay. It's okay. I'll have the C-section. And it wasn't that at any point that I feared for Judah's life. I knew he was going to be okay, and I knew it in my heart. I knew I was going to be okay and he was going to be okay. I never had fear. I only had peace, which is what I prayed for and what I believed for. And I said, while planning my home birth, I said the whole time, this is what I'm planning because this is what I desire and this is what I hope for. And that's totally fine to have hopes and desires of how you want your birth to go. But if it doesn't go that way, it's okay, because I know that God is going to prepare my heart in that moment, no matter how short that moment is. If it's a matter of seconds, He will give me the peace that everything's going to be okay and that this is what I need to do. And if I got that peace, I knew that it was the right decision. And I did. I got that peace immediately. And she came back in the room and she said, unfortunately, because baby's heart rate is not recovering, we're going to have to go for emergency C-section. And I got out of bed and Josh said, okay, my angel, what do you need to do? And I said, I want to put my makeup on. So I went to the bathroom in our labor room, and through the contractions I put my makeup on, because I thought to myself, if I'm going to have a C-section, I'm just going to look good doing it. Josh was like, what? Are you sure? Then as I came out of the bathroom, Josh said to me, babe, you'll never believe it. Your dad is assisting for the C-section. So what had happened is my mom had phoned the hospital to find out how I was doing, and the nurse had said to her, baby's going into distress, so we're opting out for emergency C-section. Well, we've got the anaesthetist, he's on his way, we're just looking for an assistant for Dr. Musa, and then she'll go in for the C-section. And my mom said, well, Dr. Henry's available, can Dr. Henry not assist? And she said, oh, that would be lovely, that would make my job a lot easier. So it was by fluke, but by God's grace and a miracle, that my dad was allowed to be the assistant for our C-section, and he assisted Dr. Musa in delivering Judah, which was just the most amazing thing. And when I turned around and Josh said that to me, I just burst out into tears, and I just thought, there's no ways, how did they get that right? Like, that's insane. So we went into the other room to start prepping me for the C-section. I was still getting really intense contractions at this point, about every 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes apart. And at this point I kind of lost my mind a little bit. My mind was so strong during labor, and getting Josh continually saying, you can do this, and going through each contraction, each surge, I just kept going, I've got this, like, I can do this, I just breathe, and I said, this is bringing me closer to my baby, and I'm so much stronger for getting through this. And then when I realized that I wasn't going to have natural anymore, that mind power just kind of went out the window. And I thought, well, what the hell am I going through this pain for? And I just lost control. So it just shows you the crazy power of your mind. So anyway, we got wheeled off for the C-section, and I remember just lying there, and even though I had the most peace, I was just so exhausted. I was so tired. And then I got to the prep ward, and my dad was there, came to me and said, hey Mouse, and I just looked at my dad and I was like, ah! I just started like crying and moaning, and I just wanted to get this over with. And Shane, he was just so amazing, and the anaesthetist came and he said, don't worry, I've got you, like we're gonna do this and you're gonna be okay, and you're about to see your baby, you're about to meet your baby. As soon as that pain went away, I just realized how exhausted I was. I mean, I had a total of 4 hours sleep in the last 48 hours, and I remember that being the most intense part of labor for me. I kept thinking to myself, I'm so exhausted, I just want to rest for 20 minutes, like I just want to have like a 20-minute power nap and then I'm good to go again. It wasn't even so much like the pain, it was just that I was so exhausted. And Josh had to actually keep waking me up because I was so tired and being like, babe, like this is happening, like stay awake, like be present, like we're about to meet our baby. Within I think 3 minutes of tugging and pulling, and you just heard this little cry. And he was still inside my tummy, like my dad was still like, oh, he's crying, he's letting us know that he's here before he's out. And everyone in the theatre had like a good little giggle, and I just remember lying there and I was like so dazed, and then all of a sudden I heard this cry and I was like, it hit me, and I was like, oh my goodness, like we have a baby, like he's out, he's not in my tummy anymore, he's here, oh, it was so crazy. And then he got taken to the side, and Josh and I watched him get cleaned up and weighed and everything, and I will never forget the doctor just repeating, he's so perfect, he's just so perfect. And it was insane. And then he got put on my chest, and I don't know how else to explain it. It is the most incredible feeling having a baby. It's just the most insane thing. Anyway, got wheeled back into recovery. After that, he went with Josh, and Josh got to have some skin-on-skin time with him, and within 20 minutes he was on my chest, and he latched beautifully, and it was a beautiful time. So myself and Josh were at the hospital, and we just took it all in for those first few moments, and Josh had to leave that evening at 8 o'clock and wasn't allowed to come back until I got discharged. And that was another part of our birth story that was really, really hard for me. He missed out on irreplaceable moments, and it was tough. But at the end of the day, Judah and I got to have non-stop skin on skin from the moment he got onto my chest until I got ready to leave the hospital on the Monday morning. He didn't leave my chest, and it was beautiful. And I will forever be grateful for that experience that we had and bonding that we had, the two of us in the hospital. It would have been 100 times better to have his daddy there, but you deal with the cards that you're dealt, and there's nothing I could have done. It was completely out of my control. So that is my birth story and how Judah made it into the world. And that brings me to the two things that I wanted to mention in this video, which are really important for me, which are the things that I think I've learned over the past 7 weeks, and the things that have motivated me to share this story, even though it's a really vulnerable place for me to be in. And I think to start off with, why it's been vulnerable is because in my mind, which I know is just my mind, and I know that it's probably not like this and there's no woman thinking this, but for me in my mind, sharing my birth story, I thought to myself, people are probably expecting to hear this beautiful natural home birth, amazing birth video, which was all part of the plan, to have this beautiful vlog of the birth, and went nothing according to plan. And I feel shame in that. Even though no one has portrayed that shame onto me, I feel shameful. And that's why it's been hard for me to share this, because I feel like I failed myself and like my body failed me in a way. And those might be some really hectic things to say, and you might be watching this going, oh Chelsea, no, that's not the case, you didn't fail your body, blah blah blah. And I know that I didn't, and I know that my body didn't fail me, but those are my feelings, and that's my emotion, and it's valid. And so that brings me to the first point, which is, firstly, I just want to say that it's totally okay to have a birth plan. I know there's like a lot of talk in society that, oh, don't plan your birth because it's never going to go according to plan, and you're just going to end up disappointing yourself, and that is not true. We all have plans for things that we want to do in life. We plan our wedding, we plan our weekend away, we plan all sorts of things, and we have desires and hopes of how we want things to go. So why can't it be the same thing for birth? We're allowed to have plans and desires and hopes and dreams and visions of how we want it to be. Yes, keep an open mind, which I definitely made a point of doing throughout my pregnancy, but I still had a plan. And I might not have had a plan of like, I want to be in the water, I want to be in this position, I want to be here in the house. I had a plan that I wanted to be at home, and I let kind of everything else, I just left it open to see what would happen, because I know many women in labour just decide on things that they never thought they would want. But I don't regret planning my home birth at all, and I would suggest it and recommend it to any woman. Plan what you want. Have a set thing when you go into your birth, this is what I want. If you don't want an epidural, that's your plan, and stick with it. And if it doesn't go that way because of whatever reason, it's okay. Don't get guilty about the fact that, oh, you know, I planned this and then I didn't do it. Like, that's nonsense. You're allowed to do that. And that then brings me to the second point, which I think is the most important one, and something that I've become so passionate about in the last 7 weeks, and I think that's because of what I went through, is that birth trauma and birth grief and birth regrets is a real thing, and it's totally fine and normal. You know, so often in society there's this saying that goes around, which is, the only thing that matters is that mom and baby are healthy. And yeah, totally, it's the most important thing, that mom and baby are healthy at the end of the day. It's a given. You know, of course mom and baby need to be healthy. That's what we all expect, you know. But it's not the only thing that matters. It's important, it's the most important thing, but it's not the only thing that matters. Mom matters too. What she feels matters too. And if she feels grief for what happened in her birth, that is totally fine, and she should be respected, and she should be given support and love and encouragement and permission to grieve what happened. And I think for me, looking back, what meant so much to me in my first, you know, and even still now, but the first initial coming home after the C-section and having like a lot of guilt and sadness and feeling like I failed. Shame, I think, is the best word to put it. Coming home and thinking, oh, you know, everyone's probably like, shame, poor Chelsea, you know, she didn't get what she wanted, she had a C-section. But that's not what my family did. They came to me and told me, Charles, we know your birth didn't go the way that it did, and it's totally okay for you to be sad about that. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay for you to grieve. It's okay for you to cry, weep, because I did. And I'm here for you to talk about it. If you want to talk about the highs, the lows, the things that you regret, if you want to talk about your future birth, whatever it is that helps you deal with what you went through. Although I didn't necessarily have a traumatic birth, I still had parts of trauma in my birth. Being alone in the hospital was extremely traumatic for me. Being alone, you know, after Josh left the hospital was traumatic for me. Having a C-section and not having Judah put on my chest and watching him from aside, for me personally, was traumatic. It's not what I wanted, and in that moment I remember thinking, this really sucks. I really wanted him on my chest. And I'm allowed to have those feelings, and although for other women they don't, and some women, you look at them and you go, wow, that woman came out of a C-section and for her it was great, but it's not for me. Does that mean now I'm not allowed to regret having a C-section? No, of course I am. You know, if that woman, if let's say a woman who never wanted natural birth, if she was forced to have natural birth, couldn't have a C-section, that would be traumatic for her. and she would be allowed to deal with that, and she would be given permission to grieve what she went through. And I think that's my point. That's what is so important, what I've learned through what I've gone through, and what I want to share to other women is it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to hate the way your birth went, and you are allowed to grieve your birth. So at the start of my postpartum, I had so many thoughts of, why did I go through this? Why did God make me do this? Like, why did he take away my home birth? Why did he take away what I prayed for and I believed so much that he was going to give me? And I think over the last few weeks and days I've realized why, and that's because if he gave me what I wanted, I would have never had a true understanding of birth trauma and been able to ignite this passion that I now have for women who have lost out on their ideal birth, and I want to fight for that. So thank you so much for watching and listening to my birth story if you made it this far. I really appreciate it, and I'm super excited for what's to come and for the future videos that I will be sharing on my breastfeeding journey and a little bit on my postpartum journey, and also on home birth and why I chose to go for home birth. So I'm really passionate about birth, about women, about moms, and I'm really excited for where this journey is going to go. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.